Effective sales leaders, whatever their title, possess something that makes them truly valuable to each salesperson and the team. They have a clear vision when it comes to metrics. But which metrics? There's no shortage of KPIs available these days. Yet paradoxically, the more KPIs we introduce, the less clarity we seem to have around pipeline coverage and forecast accuracy. So the principle we follow is simple. The manager should focus on a small set of metrics and review them frequently. Fewer metrics, looked at consistently, make it easier for salespeople to understand not only the big outcomes they need to deliver, but more importantly, the numbers that drive those outcomes, and ultimately, the actions that drive the numbers. Our recommended metrics aren't the ones you'll typically find on most KPI lists. Why? It's all about perspective. Most people unconsciously use what we call an abundance model when assessing a sales pipeline or forecast. They focus on the total value of deals in the pipeline and make rough estimates based on that. You'll often see CRM dashboards showing $1 million, $10 million, or $5 million in potential revenue, and it creates an illusion of abundance. But we recommend you look at risk rather than abundance. We're not just interested in how much potential revenue is on the table, we're asking how certain, how likely those numbers are to materialize. Risk is far harder to identify in a sales pipeline than abundance. It's easy to calculate the value of deals, but spotting risk requires a different approach. In fact, our model advises that you count first and then calculate. What does that mean? It means focusing on the number of opportunities and their location, rather than their dollar value. Value-based forecasting is riddled with risk, as it can obscure red flags scattered across the opportunity portfolio. This isn't a matter of perspective, it's grounded in probability. You can't accurately apply weightings, percentages, or probabilities to deal values at the individual or stage level. Probability only holds meaning when applied to the number of opportunities per stage and across the entire pipeline. This isn't opinion, it's a fact. In short, you need to understand the inventory of opportunities you're working with, not just the dollar figures. By focusing on the number of deals and their progression through the stages, you're far better equipped to assess the real health of your pipeline and the actual likelihood of hitting your forecast. The first key metric is the risk to revenue. Here, we're talking about monthly or quarterly revenue, though some listeners may work with weekly targets. Even if you're working towards an annual target, the same principles apply. The risk lies in the gap, the distance to revenue. We assign a color distance. That distance to revenue becomes the risk to revenue. Opportunities in the green zone are closest to the finish line, while red revenue has the furthest distance to cover. Amber sits between, leaning closer to either green or red. Green zone revenue is either already closed or at a level of commitment you'd bet your salary on. Once committed, it's locked in, not to be pulled back. But there's also a green zone standard. The entire month's target should be committed by the 15th day of the month. Think of it like running 5 kilometers in 20 minutes. It's the benchmark to strive for. If your business works on quarterly targets, the green zone standard applies to the 15th day of the middle month of the quarter. This is sales on a clock. The sales organization must operate effectively 52 weeks a year. Each missed week adds more risk to revenue. The real reason we build sales teams with high-cost salespeople is to secure the timing of revenue, not just the amount. When you focus on the timing of revenue, the value will start to take care of itself. These timing and distance standards drive far more effective daily and weekly behaviors. The clock is the best boss. Risk to growth focuses on the short, medium, and long term, with a key responsibility being to safeguard the business 2 to 3 years from now. The company's growth is largely driven by the consistent creation of opportunities, typically on a weekly basis, whether from new or existing customers or accounts. Opportunity cannot simply be viewed as a top-up activity. Here, we're referring specifically to new scheduled opportunities, where the seller is scheduled in the buyer's calendar. One of the pivotal moments in pipeline development is the first instance where a buyer commits to a scheduled engagement with the company. Technically, you might not define this initial meeting as an opportunity just yet, but in terms of risk to growth, The volume of new scheduled meetings happening in the sales operation each week is a significant factor in driving predictable growth. Creating new scheduled opportunities on a weekly basis is a key strategic priority. However, the critical metric to monitor is the moving average of new scheduled opportunities created each week. This approach helps account for short-term fluctuations while ensuring that the risk to growth metric remains secure. With that in mind, we advise following the fitness principle of never missing twice. If you fall short of your opportunity creation target this week, don't let it slip again next week. Missing consecutively can make it increasingly difficult to catch up, leading to a perpetual state of lagging activity. Ultimately, the lack of opportunity creation will escalate the risk to revenue, preventing you from achieving a sufficient number of opportunities in the green zone and on time. The next critical metric is opportunity to target coverage. This is easiest to grasp when you view your pipeline through what we call the power of one lens. Essentially, it's about understanding the level of effort required to produce just one unit of inventory in the pipeline. For example, if I need to close at least one deal this month, what level of opportunity coverage do I need to minimize the risk of not landing that deal? Obviously, I need at least one opportunity to deliver one deal, but in reality, I'll need more than that. It's unlikely two opportunities will be enough either, though there are exceptions. So the real question becomes, based on my known ratios, how many opportunities do I need forecasted to ensure I land that one critical deal? Is it 2, 3, 5, or even more? A classic mistake in pipeline coverage calculations is focusing on revenue coverage rather than opportunity coverage. Most sales operation teams look at their revenue target and calculate coverage in revenue terms. So for example, if I need to hit 100K this month and have 400K in pipeline, I consider that 4x coverage. However, this approach usually hides the fact that one large deal often makes up the bulk of that pipeline, meaning the actual coverage level and the probability of hitting the target could be much lower than expected. That's why pipelines can appear healthy on CRM dashboards, showing 3x or 5x coverage, only to have just 10 to 20% of the forecasted revenue actually materialize. That's why we recommend focusing on monthly or quarterly targets in terms of the number of opportunities in the pipeline, not just revenue. We say you should count the coverage rather than simply calculate it, because it's the number of opportunities that reveals the real risk. It's great when a large deal covers a big portion of your target, but a much safer strategy is having a well-balanced mix of deals, or what we call a deal portfolio, structured to minimize risk. It's essentially the difference between thinking like a gambler and thinking like someone with a solid executable plan. It's become somewhat fashionable in the sales world to shun anything to do with activity or numbers in the pipeline and to focus on revenue with high intent. Our experience is that what passes for revenue with high intent is actually an inadequate number of deals with high hopes that the big revenue number attached to them will come in, with deal values that were probably not realistic in the first place. The least risky option is unfortunately the one involving more precise work at an individual deal level. Shortcuts never last long in sales. I'm going to bet you've probably never taken a serious look at this metric before, but it's what we call a compound metric. In essence, it reflects a lot of the other work we've done, or not done. We refer to it as the percentage of opportunities that are date-proof. In simple terms, it's asking if the forecasted and active opportunities in the pipeline have a scheduled engagement locked into the buyer's calendar. The presence of that date acts as a signal that a relevant buyer or buyers is actually engaging, or at the very least, committing to engage with us. Now, this isn't saying that to close a deal, you must have a scheduled or calendarized engagement with the buyer. But what we've seen is that a set of opportunities where the buyer is showing commitment through a scheduled meeting will consistently outperform opportunities where there is no scheduled next step. Sure, you can prove that general principle wrong on any one-off deal, but over time, let's say over a quarter or a year, a pipeline filled with opportunities where the buyer has firmly committed to a next step will consistently deliver against the forecast. Of course, this assumes all the other parts of this sales process are being done correctly. So start by taking a hard look at your pipeline as it stands today. A good first step is to focus on any opportunities sitting in a forecast zone or a specific stage. How many of them have a scheduled next engagement with the buyer that's meant to advance the deal? Strictly speaking, the benchmark here is 100%. If you're seeing 0%, 20%, or something low, that's a red flag. It means your forecast is likely riding on opportunities where the buyer may not even be aware it's still part of what the salesperson considers an active sale. This is why the percentage of date-proof opportunities is one of the most reliable predictors of whether you'll hit your target for the month or quarter. By the way, if you find that most opportunities aren't date-proof, the solution isn't necessarily to go chasing buyers and asking for a date on their calendar. The real question is, why isn't the buyer making that commitment? More often than not, you'll need to work your way backward through the sales process and figure out the root cause. The most common reason is that the buyer doesn't see enough value in the engagement, whether that's because they don't fully understand the value your company provides, or they feel you haven't appreciated their unique context and circumstances. Let's summarize the 4 key metrics we recommend for tracking weekly progress in risk identification and growth. These are risk to revenue for this forecast period, risk to growth, opportunity times target coverage, and the percentage of opportunities with a scheduled buyer date. However, critical point we want to emphasize. It's becoming increasingly rare for a sales operation to function without some form of CRM, resulting in an abundance of key performance indicators, or KPIs, along with numerous dashboards and graphs. But it has given rise to KPI obesity, which often clouds clarity and leads to worse decision-making on a compounded weekly basis. The alternative approach is to focus on a small number of significant metrics frequently. Looking at fewer metrics more often provides the clarity needed to assess risks to revenue and growth effectively. By clarifying these essential metrics for the sales team, you make it easier for them to pinpoint specific actions they need to change, to mitigate risks in the pipeline and deliver the reliability required. If you want your sales team to consistently hit their numbers, teach them to watch these key metrics weekly and adopt the principle of never miss twice.